So we told you that we're building up a white paper for the event. And we've also told you that we use Slido. Now we want to encourage you to capture messages from the speakers. Think about what is it interesting that you got out of that speech, or if you hear a quote which is like super interesting that you would want to share it with other people. Besides social media, I strongly encourage you to go on Slido, which is ongoing, and type there the idea which you gotten out, or if there are any keywords or any interesting facts that you've gotten out of the presentation from the speaker. And that we're going to pile it up in the white paper that we're going to release after the event. So next up, I'm going to invite Mr. Jeremy Druker. So how was it before, Sherry? If you're old enough to consume media, then you're old enough to be media literate, right? Cool. So now we're going to go to another category of people, and we're looking towards seniors. And I'm going to invite Mr. Jeremy Druker, which is the Executive Director and Editor-in-Chief at Transition, TOL in Czech Republic. And something interesting is that he has been declared the enemy of independent Slovakia by the former culture minister.
Okay, thank you. That was a long time ago, about 20 years ago, and I guess story for a beer this evening. I'm going to start to talk about digital literacy for seniors. I know it's a pretty boring title. I thought I tried to think of something snappier. But probably that evokes images of teaching the internet to old people in a library. And you're probably wondering, why are we talking about that today? Why is that important? I hope after 20 minutes or so, I will have convinced you otherwise. Seniors have been a very neglected group. We've talked today about the youngest citizens in our societies. We've talked about teenagers. We haven't yet talked about older people. I say neglected, and I mean that among people who are launching media literacy or digital literacy initiatives, because there are certain groups of people that do not ignore seniors. And these are the disinformers, for want of a better name. So as those of you who live in Central Europe probably know, maybe elsewhere as well, older people in these countries have been bombarded with fake news and other forms of disinformation. These are the common narratives. Before, Griffin from the US Embassy discussed some of them, but just so it's clear for everyone, these are the messages that older people are getting over and over again, largely in their email boxes. A lot of older people in this region are still not on social media, but they are getting chain emails sent to them, which then they send along, and those get sent along. These are the narratives, anti-migrant, anti-Islam. You've heard a lot of this before, but maybe you didn't know that this was what was reaching older people as well. Why seniors? Why are they such a big target group for people trying to spread disinformation? As you can imagine, very susceptible to manipulation. A lot of them simply grew up in another time. So no one has really told them how easy it is to set up a website, how easy it is to put a link to a YouTube video. They just think, oh, here's a website, it looks professional, it can maybe be trusted. A lot of older people are in this region disgruntled, lonely. They have time in their hands to read the messages that they're getting in the email boxes, to send them along. And many of them by now distrust the mainstream media and journalists. We can talk about later why that might be, but for many it is true. And also, as discussed earlier, a lot of what's happening with the spread of disinformation is through networks of trust. So when an older person gets a message from someone they know, a distant relative out in the regions, even people who are doctors or lawyers or professionals in these countries have also been spreading disinformation. Older people are more likely to believe that, not surprising, like most of us would. The strategy works. These are just some data, too much text, but bear with me. So you can see here around 35% of people between 55 and 64 spread emails warning about the dangers I mentioned before, migration, Islamic waves taking over Central Europe, and 47% older than 65. So much higher than younger groups. And you can see the waves of chain emails will spread like wildfire if you look at figures like 47%. Seniors also spread political news 6 times more likely than young people. They often don't verify because, again, like I said before, they're trusting the people that send it to them, former colleagues, classmates, and so on. One survey showed that 40% don't verify information from their favorite sources, and over 90% of seniors have received these chain emails, and 1 in 5 say they have forwarded them along. So we don't really know how many, but at least 1 in 5. And the least media literate group in at least Czech society, where these figures come from, I should have mentioned that, are women over the age of 60 with lower education. So why is this important? We talked a little bit again about that earlier today, but increased animosity towards institutions, not just towards the elites, but kind of the democracy as a whole, the whole transition. It gets people more disgruntled. Older people are getting even more depressed than they might have been before. Intergenerational conflict. I'm not sure if you know what I'm talking about here, but again, maybe you might if you're from Central Europe or other parts of the world where disinformation has hit the older generation particularly hard. You cannot imagine how many Czech younger people I've met, ages 30, 40, who now say, I can't talk to my mother anymore, at least about politics. But I've heard people even say, I can't even talk to my parents anymore. They've been brainwashed by this stuff. So this is a generational problem. You really have younger people just angry at the older generation because of being, in a way, brainwashed by this type of stuff. And I put here in red, they vote. I think that's not too surprising, right? Younger people often don't go to the polls, older people do. When you look at places like the Czech Republic, where the difference in the presidential election was around 50 to 60,000 votes, this can make a difference. There are a lot of us that really think that all the chain mails before the election really led to our great President Zeman being elected, re-elected the last time. I want to say here a caveat, though. There is a lot of hidden potential in seniors, and I don't want it to sound like I'm blaming them or we think that they are completely media illiterate. They are literate in a different kind of way. Franjek talked about this, I think, before to some extent in the context of Belarus, but you have a lot of older people that were used to growing up with media under the old regime. They know how to read between the lines. They know how to assess the credibility of news, to understand propaganda. So these are not teenagers with no experience. And this can be a plus. And I'll talk a bit later how you can leverage that in media literacy activities. But we should never forget that kind of lifelong experience that older people do have. And lest we forget, a very, very much a growing portion of the population. I think everyone knows the demographics. People are living longer. They want to lead active lives. So there is that openness for education. So my organization, Transitions, launched about a year ago with support from the U.S. Embassy in Prague, a media digital literacy program for seniors. We started off doing research. We felt we knew something, but not that we knew everything. We had a group of young anthropologists do some in-depth interviews with older people. We created a methodology, and we've had about 50 events in various formats with about 150 participants so far. The response has been really positive. Older people are so happy to have people go out and speak to them. Part of what we've been doing is a kind of road trip around the Czech Republic into smaller towns, some cities, and just meeting with older people. I'll talk a little bit about the strategy in a moment, but you cannot imagine how happy people are that people from Prague or wherever it is, journalists are coming to talk to them. Because as I said, almost no media literacy initiatives have targeted older people. So half of our initial group has actually started organizing their own events now in their own cities. So in a way, we're trying to seed the field, but then the hope is that older people start to do it on their own, which is what's been happening. So one of the top lessons we've learned is really you have to understand the reality among older people today. Just don't get fooled by the symptoms of why these chain emails are spreading, but really look at the deep causes. Distrust, confusion, frustration, this belief that the media, the mainstream media, are fabricating news for business or political reasons. They are very much against, many of them, I don't want to generalize too much, but against political correctness. So for them, it's distorting the real information. And their understanding of disinformation is then very, very different from our own. And you have to really understand why. In many ways, it's a rational attitude that many of them have come up with, why they're believing this stuff. and then to adjust accordingly. It's really not a good idea, as we found, to frame any kind of training we're doing as media education or fighting disinformation. The first, because it sounds kind of patronizing, and the second, because it then, in a way, makes you an agent of the US government or the CIA or whoever it is. You don't want to go hit them hard with, we're all going to get together and have fun and fight disinformation together. Much better to say, we want to meet with you to understand the media and the internet better, and we want to work with you to use the experiences you've had in your lives. First steps, it's going to be too much text again, but I'm a journalist, so please forgive me. Strengthen their trust in good quality journalism. Really talk about how it works, that there are journalists in the mainstream media who verify their facts, who do a professional job, who know information verification. Just talk about the process and how it works. A lot of people just won't know. I mean, we've really found that for them, when we introduce them to real live journalists and explain how Czech radio works, Czech TV works, they're really excited about that. Strengthen their trust in their own capacity and skills. So it really, some of them underestimate how much they really know and how much we've given them exercises. Look at these fake photos. What's wrong in that photo? What was added through Photoshop? And a lot of them are really able to pick stuff out. They're very perceptive, and they're happy and pleased that they actually have those kinds of skills. Explain also the psychological aspects of modern communication, how manipulation works, how the advertising industry works. A lot of them are also very upset. They have grandchildren. Very upset, all of the stuff that Sherry was talking about earlier. They're very much worried about how this is affecting young people today. So if you get into that topic, it will interest them. It will also teach them some good lessons. Then and only then can you start to kind of very tentatively discuss the idea of disinformation. It's really not a good idea, as I said, to get into this at the outset. Only then can you start to look at disinformation and propaganda. Above all, really make sure that your activities work to increase trust in their own skills, in how the media works, and do everything you can to avoid deepening their confusion and distrust. It really looks bad, at least in Prague, if we all go out to the regions and start talking down to people and starting to confuse them. It's really a much better idea to take it slowly. A bunch of other recommendations. I can also send this around because this is too much to read this quickly, but it really taught us a lesson that we ourselves do not know seniors well, and we've worked with organizations that really work with seniors. They don't maybe do media literacy or digital literacy, but they're very much used to working with older people and just gave us a lot of good information on how to approach the topic. I don't know if people know this term, but third-age universities are popular in the Czech Republic. These are organized classes for older people. It's a good way to meet the older generation. Senior clubs, at least again in the Czech Republic, we have a very well-developed system of libraries. So that's a great place also. Seniors are very used to going to libraries for various events, so we've used that as venues. Intergenerational learning. We also have a program where we've been teaching students, journalism students, on how to identify disinformation, propaganda, and so on. We've engaged those students to help with the seniors. The seniors really have enjoyed the intergenerational aspects of it, meeting younger people with the same goals. I only have 2 minutes left. So as I said, go offline, go to the big cities, invite journalists, other experts, create real opportunities for older people to meet real-life journalists. That really helps build trust, as it does through repeated visits, going back to the same groups over and over again. We're looking to expand this program. We're probably going to do so next year to the Visegrad countries. If anyone's interested in working with us, we'd be happy to work with you. And I'll be around today and tomorrow if you have any questions. So these are my contacts. Thank you. I think I finished on time.
Jeremy, if you can please keep the mic. There are 2 questions which came on Slido. So if you can respond them to very, very briefly, because else Fran is going to run me on the hallway afterwards, because I promised to be on time. First is, can we get more data about the survey? So if you can give more data regarding the seniors.
Yeah, it would be hard now to just go through all the figures, but I can
Okay.
definitely supply it. Some
Cool.
of those were figures done, a recent survey by Czech television,
Mm-hmm.
another one by LPDA, which is a senior organization, and a couple other research groups. So all the data is pretty fresh in the last 6 to 9 months or so.
Cool, thank you. And the second, how easy or difficult was it to engage senior people?
How what?
How difficult was it, or easy, to engage senior people?
Yeah, we had an original, I went through that really quickly at the end, but we had a pilot workshop where we tried out some of the methods, and there was some suspicion, I would say at the beginning. I was sitting in the corner just taking notes, and one of the older women came up to me and said, well, what are you doing here? And I think she was, because she knew that I was an English speaker, and I think she was very suspicious that I was some kind of agent reporting on seniors. But overall, I mean, like anywhere, some people have been resistant to the idea. But like I said, the vast majority of people have been very receptive and really happy to start a discussion on these topics. They know it's a problem. They're tired of being tricked by various manipulators throughout society. So that was a way also to appeal to them.
Cool, thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you.